Hello, and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of The Star Beast by Robert Heinlein. Chapter 16. Sorry We Messed Things Up. John Thomas Stewart XI had wanted to attend the conference. It required a flat refusal to keep him away. He was in the Hotel Universal, in the suite provided for him and his mother, playing checkers with his bodyguard, when Betty Sorensen showed up with Miss Holtz. Myra Holtz was an operative for Busek of Depp Space and concealed her policewoman profession under a pleasant facade. Mr. Kiku's instructions to her concerning Betty had been, "Keep a sharp eye on her. She has a taste for excitement." The two guards greeted each other. Betty said, "Hi, Johnny. Why aren't you over at the Heap Big Smoke?" "They wouldn't let me." "Me too." She glanced around. "Where's the Duchess?" "Gone shopping. I'm still getting the silent treatment. 17 hats she's bought. What have you done to your face?" Betty turned to a mirror. "Like it? It's called cosmic contouring, and it's the latest thing. It makes you look like a zebra with the pip." "Why, you country oaf. Ed, you like it, don't you?" Ed Cohen looked up from the checkerboard and said hastily, "I wouldn't know. My wife says I have no taste. Most men haven't. Johnny, Myra and I have come to invite you two to go out on the town. How about it?" Cohen answered, "I don't favor that, Myra." "It was her idea," Miss Holtz answered. John Thomas said to Cohen, "Why not? I'm sick of checkers." "Well, I'm supposed to keep in touch with the office. They might want you any time now." "Pooh," said Betty. "You've got a phone. Anyhow, Myra does." Cohen shook his head. "Let's play it safe." "Am I under arrest?" Betty persisted. "Is Johnny—" No, it's more protective custody." "Then you can protectively cuss him wherever he is, or stay here and play checkers with yourself. Come on, Johnny." Cohen looked at Miss Holtz. She answered slowly, "I suppose it's all right, Ed. We'll be with them." Cohen shrugged and stood up. Johnny said to Betty, "I'm not going out in public with you looking like that. Wash your face." "But, Johnny, it took 2 hours to put it on." "The taxpayers paid for it, didn't they?" "Well, yes, but wash your face, or we go nowhere. Don't you agree, Miss Holtz?" Special Operative Holtz had only a flower pattern adorning her left cheek, aside from the usual tinting. She said thoughtfully, "Betty doesn't need it, not at her age." "Oh, you're a couple of Puritans," Betty said bitterly, stuck her tongue out at Johnny, and slouched into the bath. She came out with her face glowing pink from scrubbing. "Now I'm stark naked. Let's go." There was another tussle at the lift, which Ed Cohen won. They went to the roof to take an air taxi for sightseeing instead of going down to the streets. "Both you kids have had your faces spread around the papers the past few days, and this town has more crackpots than a second-hand shop. I don't want any incidents." "If you hadn't let them bully me, my face wouldn't be recognizable." "His would." "Well, we could paint him, too. Any male face would be improved with makeup." But she entered the lift, and they took an air taxi. "Where to, Chief?" "Oh," said Cohen, "cruise around and show us the sights. Put it on the hourly rate." "You're the doctor. I can't fly across the Boulevard of Suns, some parade or other." "I know." "Look," put in Johnny, "take us to the spaceport." "No," Cohen corrected, "not out there." "Why not, Ed? I haven't seen Lummox yet. I want to look at him. He may not be well." "That's the one thing you can't do," Cohen told him. "The Roshii ship is out of bounds." "Well, I can see it from the air, can't I?" "No, but—" "Never mind him," Betty advised. "We'll get another taxi. I've got money, Johnny. So long, Ed." "Look," complained the driver, "I'll take you to Timbuktu, but I can't hang around over a landing flat. The cops get rude about it." "Head for the spaceport," Cohen said resignedly. There was a barricade around the many acres assigned to the Roshii, except where it had been broken to let their delegation enter the Boulevard of Suns, and even then the barricade joined others carrying on down the avenue toward the administrative group. Inside the enclosure, the landing craft of the Roshii sat squat and ugly, almost as large as a terrestrial starship. Johnny looked at it and wondered what it was going to be like on Roshijud. He was uncomfortable at the thought, not because he was fearful, but because he had not yet told Betty that he was going. He'd started a couple of times, but it had not worked out right. Since she had not raised the subject, he assumed that she did not know. There were other sightseers in the air, and a crowd not very thick outside the barricade. No single wonder lasted long in capital. Its residents prided themselves on being blasé, and in fact the Roshii were not fantastic compared to a dozen other friendly races, some of them members of the Federation. The Roshii swarmed around the base of their ship, doing unexplained things with artifacts they had erected. Johnny tried to estimate their number, found it like guessing beans in a bottle. Dozens, surely. How many more? The taxi cruised just outside the patrol point of the police air cars. Johnny suddenly called out, "Hey, there's Lummy!" Betty craned her neck. "Where, Johnny?" "Coming into sight on the far side of their ship. There!" He turned to the driver. "Say, mister, could you put us around on the far side as close in as they'll let you?" The driver glanced at Cohen, who nodded. They swung around the police sentries and came in toward the Roshij craft from the far side. The driver picked a point between two police cars and back a little. Lummox could be seen clearly now, closely attended by a group of Roshii and towering over them. "I wish I had binocs," Johnny complained. "I can't really see." "Pair in the glove compartment," offered the driver. Johnny got them out. They were a simple optical type without electronic magnification, but they brought Lummox up much closer. He stared into his friend's face. "How does Lummy look, Johnny?" "Okay, kind of skinny, though. I wonder if they're feeding him right." "Mr. Greenberg tells me they aren't feeding Lummy at all. I thought you knew." "What? They can't do that to Lummy." "I don't see what we can do about it." "Well," John Thomas lowered the window and tried to get a better look. "Say, can't you take it in a little closer? A lower, maybe? I want to give him a good checking over." Cohen shook his head. The driver grumbled, "I don't want no words with the cops." But he did move in a little closer until he lined up with the police cars. Almost at once, the speaker in the cars overhead blared, "Hey you, number 484, where do you think you're going with that can? Drag it out of there." The driver muttered and started to obey. John Thomas, still with the glasses in his eyes, said, "Aw," and then added, "I wonder if he can hear me." "Lummy!" he shouted into the wind. "Lummox!" The Roshia raised her head and looked wildly around. Cohen grabbed John Thomas and reached for the window closure, but Johnny shook free. "Oh, go fry eggs," he said angrily. "I've been pushed around long enough. Lummox, it's Johnny! Boy, over here! Come over this way!" Cohen dragged him inside and slammed the window shut. "I knew I shouldn't have come out. Driver, let's get out of here." "Only too happy." But hold it just back of the police lines. I want to check on this. Make up your mind." It needed no binoculars to see what was happening. Lummox headed straight for the barrier on a beeline with the taxi, scattering other Roshii right and left. On reaching the barrier, no attempt was made to flow over it. Lummox went through it. "Jumpin' jeepers," Cohen said softly, "but the Tanglefoot will stop her." It did not. Lummox slowed down, but one mighty foot followed another, and as if the charged air had been deep mud. With the persistence of a glacier, the Roshia was seeking the point most closely under the taxi. And more Roshii were pouring out the gap. They made still heavier weather of the immobilizing field, but still they came. As Cohen watched, Lummox broke free of the zone and came on at a gallop, with people scattering ahead of her. Cohen snapped, "Myra, get through on another circuit to the military. I'll call the office." Betty grabbed his sleeve. "No!" "Huh? You again. Shut up or you'll get the back of my hand." "Mr. Cohen, you will listen," she went on hastily. "It's no good calling for help. There isn't anybody who can make Lummox listen but Johnny. And they won't listen to anybody but Lummox. You know that. So put him down where he can talk to Lummy, or you're going to have a lot of people hurt, and it will be your fault." Security Operative First Class Edwin Cohen stared at her and reviewed in his mind his past career and his future hopes. Then he made a brave decision almost instantly. "Take her down," he snapped. "Land her and let the kid and me out." The driver groaned. "I'm charging extra for this." But he landed the car so fast that it jarred them. Cohen snatched the door open, and he and John Thomas burst out. Myra Holtz tried to grab Betty, was unsuccessful. She herself jumped out as the driver was already racing. "Johnny!" squealed Lummox and held out mighty arms in a universal gesture of welcome. John Thomas ran to the Star Beast. "Lummy, are you sure you're all right?" "Sure," agreed Lummox. "Why not? Hi, Betty." "Hi, Lummy." "Hungry, though," Lummox added thoughtfully. "We'll change that." "It's all right. I'm not supposed to eat now." John Thomas started to answer this amazing statement when he noticed Miss Holtz ducking away from one of the Roshii. Others were milling around as if uncertain how to treat this development. When Johnny saw Ed Cohen draw his gun and place himself between the Roshiu and Myra, he said suddenly, "Lummox, these are my friends. Tell your friends to leave them alone and get back inside, quickly." "Whatever you say, Johnny." The Roshia spoke in the whining speech of her kin. At once she was obeyed. "And make us a saddle. We'll go with you and have a long talk." "Sure, Johnny." They got aboard, Johnny giving Betty a hand up, and started in through the break in the barrier. When Lummox struck the Tanglefoot field again, they stopped, and Lummox spoke sharply to one of the others. That Roshiu called out to one inside, and the Tanglefoot field disappeared. They moved on in without difficulty. When Mr. Kiku, Sergei Greenberg, and Dr. Ftamel arrived, they found an armed truce, tents on both sides. All the Roshii were back inside the broken barrier. Military craft in quantity had replaced the police patrol, and far overhead, out of sight, bombers were ready in final extremity to turn the area into a radioactive desert. The Secretary General and the Chief of Staff met them at the barricade. The Secretary General looked grave. "Ah, Henry, it seems we have failed. Not your fault." Mr. Kiku looked out at the massed Roshii. "Perhaps." The Chief of Staff added, "We are evacuating the blast radius as rapidly as possible, but if we have to do it, I don't know what we can do for those 2 youngsters in there." "Then let's not do anything, shall we? Not yet?" "I don't think you understand the seriousness of the situation, Mr. Undersecretary. For example, we placed an immobilizing locus entirely around this area. It's gone. They canceled it out. Not just here, everywhere." "So, perhaps you do not understand the seriousness of the situation, General. In any case, a few words can do no harm. Come, Sergei. Coming, Doctor?" Mr. Kiku left the group around the Secretary General and headed for the break in the barricade. Wind sweeping across the miles-wide field forced him to clutch his hat. "I do not like wind," he complained to Dr. Ftamel. "It is disorderly." "There is a stronger wind ahead," the Rargelian answered soberly. "My friend is this wise. They will not hurt me. I am their employee. But you, what else can I do?" "I do not know, but there are situations in which courage is useless." "Possibly. I've never found one yet." "One finds a situation but once." They were approaching the solid mass of Roshii around Lummox. They could make out the 2 humans on the back of the Roshia a good 100 yards beyond. Kiku stopped. "Tell them to get out of my way. I wish to approach the Roshia Lummox." Ftamel translated. Nothing happened, though the Roshii stirred uneasily. Greenberg said, "Boss, how about asking Lummox and the kids to come out here? That crowd doesn't smell friendly." "No, I dislike shouting into this wind. Please call out to the steward lad and tell him to have them make way." "Okay, boss, this'll be fun to tell my grandchildren, if I have grandchildren." He cupped his mouth and shouted, "Johnny! John Stewart! Tell Lummox to have them clear a path." "Sure." A path wide enough for a column of troops opened as if swept with a broom. The little procession moved down the ranks of Roshii. Greenberg felt gooseflesh crawling up and down his back. Mr. Kiku's only worry seemed to be keeping his hat on in the wind. He swore primly while clutching at his head. They stopped in front of Lummox. "Howdy, Mr. Kiku," John Thomas called out. "Shall we come down?" "Perhaps it would be best." Johnny slid off, then caught Betty. "Sorry we messed things up." "So am I, if you did. Will you introduce me to your friend, please?" Oh, sure. Lummox, this is Mr. Kiku. He's a nice fellow, a friend of mine.
How do you do, Mr. Kiku?
How do you do, Lummox? Mr. Kiku looked thoughtful. Doctor, is not that the commander there by the Roshia, the one with the ugly glint in his eye? The Rargelian looked. Yes, it is he. Ask him if he has reported the conference to his mistress. Very well. The Medusoid spoke to the Roshij commander, was answered. He says not. John Thomas, we concluded a treaty with the Roshii to permit all that I discussed with you. Suddenly they repudiated the agreement with the discovery that we would not surrender your person without guarantees. Will you help me find out if such were the wishes of your friend? You mean Lummox? Sure. Very well. Wait a moment. Dr. Ftamel, will you report the essentials of our agreement to the Roshia Lummox in the presence of the commander, or are the concepts beyond her? Eh? Why should they be? She was perhaps 200 of your years old when she was brought here. So much? Well, speak ahead. The Rargelian commenced the curious whines of the Roshij tongue, addressing Lummox. Once or twice Lummox interrupted, then allowed him to continue. When Ftamel had finished, she spoke to the expedition commander. Ftamel said to the humans, She asks, can this be true? The commander made as wide a circle as space permitted, crept up in front of her, with the little group representing the Federation giving way. His legs were retracted so that he crawled like a caterpillar. Without lifting his head from the ground, he whined his answer. He is admitting the truth but pleading necessity. I wish he would hurry up with it, Kiku fretted. I'm getting chilly. His thin knees trembled. She is not accepting the explanation. I will spare you the exact tenor of her language, but her rhetoric is superb. Suddenly, Lummox spat out one squeal, then reared up with 4 legs clear of the ground. With arms retracted, the great beast swung down her head and struck the unfortunate commander a smashing sideways blow. It lifted him off the ground, bowled him into the crowd. Slowly he regained his feet, slunk back to the spot in front of Lummox. Lummox began to speak. She is saying, I wish you could hear this in her language, that so long as the galaxy shall last, the friends of Johnnie are her friends. She adds that those who are not friends of her friends are nothing, less than nothing, never to be suffered in her sight. She commands this in the names of... It is a recitation of her ancestry with all its complicated branches, and is somewhat tedious. Shall I attempt to translate? Don't bother, Mr. Kiku told him. Yes is yes in any language. But she tells it with great beauty, Ftamel said. She is recalling to them things dreadful and wonderful, reaching far into the past. I am interested only in how it affects the future, and in getting out of this pesky wind. Mr. Kiku sneezed. Oh, dear. Dr. Ftamel took his cape off and hung it around Mr. Kiku's narrow shoulders. My friend, my brother, I am sorry. No, you will be cold. Not I. Let us share it, then. I am honored, the Medusoid answered softly, his tendrils twitching with emotion. He spread it around them, and they huddled together while Lummox finished her peroration. Betty turned to Johnnie. That's more than you ever did for me. Now, Slugger, you know you're never cold. Well, put your arm around me, at least. Huh? In front of everybody? Go snuggle up to Lummox. While speaking, Lummox had stayed reared up. As the oration progressed, the assembled Roshii sank down, retracting their legs until they were all in the humble position of the commander. At last it was over, and Lummox added one sharp remark. The Roshii stirred and began to move. She says, translated Ftamel, that she now wishes to be alone with her friends. Ask her, directed Kiku, please to assure her friend John Thomas that all she has said is true and binding. Very well. As the other Roshii hurried away, Ftamel spoke briefly to Lummox. Lummox listened, then turned to John Thomas. Out of the great mouth came the piping little girl voice.
That's right, Johnnie. Cross my heart.
John Thomas nodded solemn agreement. Don't worry, Mr. Kiku. You can depend on it. And we'll find out what they can depend on and where it takes them next time.